And a very warm welcome. You're joining us here at Hydepark on Other Derana 24. Tonight, we will be talking about Sri Lanka's economy. Crisis to reform. Can Sri Lanka build a resilient economy? And I believe I have just the right person to discuss all this and much more going forward. What will stand right for Sri Lanka? What reforms will work for Sri Lanka's future? I've invited to our studios a politician and economist, a member of parliament, former minister, Dr. Harsha de Silva. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Indeewari.
You're also chairman of the Committee of Public Finance, a lot of work ongoing. So let's start off about the economy. Do you really think the growth trajectory that we are looking at going forward really works for Sri Lanka's future, and the reforms we've undertaken is on path to reform, or are we looking at a repeat of what we've seen before?
No, we're certainly nowhere near what we need in terms of growth, because you see, when we went into the crisis, we did the reforms we had to do because we were forced to do it. We should have done these reforms many years ago, decades ago, in fact. Unfortunately, those who are currently in government were the ones who objected mainly, through the trade unions and so on, was not willing to, for instance, look at public sector size, or say market pricing of utilities. Particularly in terms of the massive losses made by the Petroleum Corporation and the Electricity Board. All that had to be done was to ensure that the tariff reflected costs. You can't continue to run these agencies or state-owned enterprises at losses, So, and then in terms of education reforms, public sector reforms, financial sector reforms, whole bunch of reforms that needed to be done, partly that got done during the coming out of the crisis. But we only got to a stable economy. We have macro stability. We have, fairly stable interest rates. They've come down from the high of 30 plus to, 7-8% for government securities. We've had inflation go up to, almost 70%, which has come down to almost minus, and we are around 2.5–3%. Exchange rate, we went to 370, we came back to 294, 295. Now I hear it's around 39, 309, maybe touching 310. Somewhere there. There's a bit of a issue there. We can talk about it later. But all this happened between 2023 and 2024. And fundamentally, we brought in some really strong laws. One of the things is the central bank law, the act which created the independence of the central bank. If you recall, during, I don't want to name names, but we know certain governors and secretaries of treasury, they basically ran it. They said, look, we need so much money, print so much for us. And printing money became a huge issue. Even regular folks started talking about printing money in this country. So that was a very irresponsible act, and they were printing money and at the same time controlling exchange rates. You just can't do both at the same time. So therefore, now with the central bank independent, there is no way that the politicians can interfere in the affairs of the central bank. They agree with the government on an inflation target for 5 years, and once that is done, they have instrumental independence to ensure that they keep within plus or minus 2% of that target, which is 5, so between 3 and 7. I have brought this up with the governor many times, and he agrees with me that we need to relook at this 5% target. I think it is too high, And perhaps it was okay to have agreed to that at that time, but now things are different. We can manage inflation. Perhaps we can do plus minus 2% on a 2% target or a 2.5% target. That's what I think. So that's the stability story. But your question is, I mean, is a growth rate good enough? And the answer to that is absolutely not, because I've done the numbers. For us to pass the threshold of a upper middle income to a high income country by 2048, when we'll be 100 years, we need to grow at 9 to 9.5% year on year, every year, real growth. And we're nowhere near that. You know, sub 4.5% growth. I mean, like Dr. Vijayawardena said, I think one day it was on your show, where that, you know, 4 to 4.5% is natural anyway we get. You know, you don't really need a government to do that. And I agree with him. You know, so what we need is 9.5% growth, and that is very difficult to do. And the government says, look, they are planning to get 7%, but I have my doubts that they'll get anywhere near that. So that's the issue.
You outlined that some of these reforms of long overdue, we should have done them decades ago maybe. So does this mean going to the IMF was just the right decision even at the lowest stage of the economy?
Yeah, I mean, I was the first, as you know, in Parliament to propose, and the government at the time continued to ridicule me, saying we don't need to go to the IMF, we can manage. My argument continued to be, look, you have misdiagnosed the problem. The problem really is not liquidity issue. You know, there were two schools of thought at the time, and one school of thought was, look, you know, we can manage. You know, we just need some money to tide over. So that tide over money came from Bangladesh Central Bank, $200 million, or somewhere else, China, $300 million, do a swap here, swap there, local swap, other swap. And that we had a pipeline of funds coming in. China was going to give us this, that one was going to give us this much. But my argument continued to be, look, you've not diagnosed the problem. The problem is not just a liquidity issue, it's a solvency issue. The fundamentals of our economy were at the time, you know, damaged. We need to repair them, we need to reform them. You know, unless you do that, you're not going to be able to, on a sustainable basis, you know, ensure that this economy would run in the way it is supposed to. But, you know, when I talked about the reforms necessary and what we did during that IMF or during the current ongoing IMF program, I only talked about earlier about the central bank. But there are three other pieces of legislation that are equally important, and one is the Public Finance Management Act. I mean, that pretty much gives the contours within which we can operate. These are the limits. You know, you have to run 2.3% primary surplus. You know, you can only spend 13% of your GDP, right? And your borrowing gross financing needs have to be, over a period of time, 13%. Only 8.5% local, 4.5% foreign, etc. So those are the bunch of rules that we agreed. No one else. We agreed in Parliament. The current folks didn't, but they are. We can talk about it later. Then another one is the Public Debt Management Act, which has put a medium-term plan for public debt. You know, how is public debt going to be managed? And previous to that, in 2018, the day, if you recall, the coup happened, October coup, that particular day, that afternoon, we approved what's called the Liability Management Act, which means that the Treasury which was to be taken away. When I mean treasury, not the treasury, the Ministry of Finance, but the debt management office, right, was to be taken away from the central bank, which is now being done, and by 1 Jan 2026 that will be a separate entity, and that could then utilize tools available in the modern context to sort of manage yield curves, play quote unquote the market to an extent to ensure that we end up winners. And the last one is the Economic Transformation Act, which follows really, after the fundamental discipline has been established, central banks' independence and its responsibilities clearly are marked, stabilization established, then what happens is growth, and for growth is the Economic Transformation Act.
You mentioned earlier on that this government that then opposed to many of the reforms, and there were many protests sponsored by the government or the party that was that's in power. So does this mean now this is just the right government to run office because they can make things happen and no longer derail maybe?
Yeah, I mean from a sort of we can be optimistic, thinking, look, these are the same guys who are now basically saying, look, glorifying the IMF. I mean, it's ironic, where these people said before election, there's not a single country that the IMF has been able to pull out of difficulty. Now, of course, I heard Silva speaking in London yesterday to an audience saying, singing the praises of the IMF, and I was wondering, who am I listening to here, right? So this is almost an oxymoron, But the real issue is fundamentally, do they believe in the Washington consensus or the neoliberal sort of game plan of particularly what they accuse the IMF of being. Now, when I must make a clarification here, when I said, look, go to the IMF, we had to go to the IMF, there's no other choice. But me personally and our party does not believe in a neoliberal mechanism, right? We have presented what's called a blueprint for Sri Lanka, and in that we have very clearly identified what our philosophy is. And
what is your philosophy?
Yeah, we believe in a social market economy, which means we are not, that doesn't mean we're a socialist. Our thinking is that wealth has to be created, right? To create wealth, you have to have a mechanism where markets work, right? And markets must work, particularly if you look at agricultural poverty. I'll tell you, and I'll take a whole day if you wish to say why farmers are poor, right? Because agriculture markets don't work, the supply chains are broken, there is no information market for agriculture, farmers don't know what to grow, there is no logistics mechanism, there is no post-harvest management, but then the issue is there must be a market for that. Those markets are broken. If the government says no, we'll do one crop, one village kind of nonsensical business, which has been sort of, talked about for decades, we will continue to not succeed in agriculture. So our point is, whether it is in agriculture, whether it is in anything else, that markets must work. And in order to ensure markets don't fail, state must intervene, right? And also we believe in a welfare economy. When I say welfare economy, that doesn't conflict with what I'm saying. What I mean by a welfare economy is we believe in free education, right? We believe in free health.
But there's also an argument against a welfare economy where people continue to depend on handouts and other benefits.
That's not what I mean. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that we provide our people with a basic requirements, a social safety net, where, like I said, particularly health and education, that there is enough funding for health and education, right? So now, for instance, if you take 1990 Suez area, right? I mean, that is the concept, right? I mean, people pay taxes, right? And they deserve, in an emergency at 2:30 in the morning, that there is someone to help them if they need to be taken to critical care. I mean, that is a fundamental, basic thing that the government must provide its citizens. So that you can't keep to the market and say, well, if you are rich and you have a good insurance, the private ambulance will come and take you to hospital. No, we are not there, right? But we are here. So while we create an efficient market and market play will determine prices, and we are not for giving subsidies to rich people. You know, subsidies are not for rich people.
In that case, you might want the tax policy also looked at?
I mean, you know, we need to move away from what we call indirect taxes and move more towards direct taxes. I mean, taxes must be progressive, equitable, fair, transparent, right? So in that context, you know, when we wrote our manifesto, our blueprint, we said we are not going to change the 100,000 threshold for pay tax. The guys who are now in office, you know, said they are going to increase the threshold to 200,000. That up to 200,000 you don't need to pay any tax. And obviously a lot of young people, middle class people, you know, they said, well, we are voting NPP because we don't have to pay taxes until we make 200,000 rupees. But if you really think about it, beyond the rhetoric and just gimmicks for the election, what we said is you pay 1% from 100 to 150,000. That means you are making 150,000 rupees a month, you pay 500 rupees. And I don't think any young person would not be willing to pay 500 rupees as taxes for a month.
But how is that going to really address the revenue issue for the government? And to add to that, how are you going to target the top 1%, the rich?
No, so this is the point. See, they're talking about expanding the tax net. But by they never went to 200,000, but they went to 150,000. So what happened was the base they shrunk the base because, you know, so many people were left out. What I'm saying is people also feel responsible for you know, progress of their country. People know and appreciate that we get services in health and education, right? And people are not unaware of that. People are aware and people want to participate. And in this case, you can't even participate. So what I'm saying is, look, you know, the whole tax structure would have been more equitable. And if you think that 500 rupees for 150,000 person earning 150,000 rupees a month is not, then I surrender, right? I rest my case. I'm not going to argue with you, but I don't think so. And even if there are people who think so, you can convince them otherwise. But your point is valid. You know, what about the 1% rich people? Okay, they're paying 36%, right? And 36% is a pretty high rate. But the issue is not that. What you call rich in this country, where you get to 36% is not rich at all. So people get to the 36% fairly quickly, right? And if you look at it from a sort of equity point of view and compare it with other countries, for example, you know, multiple other countries, you know, you don't get to the highest threshold till you're actually making some real money.
Right, I think on that note, we'll have to come back after this break. Dr. Harsha de Silva describes the 2026 budget as the biggest betrayal of the public mandate. We'll discuss all this and much more when we return after this short break here at Hyde Park. Do stay with us. Welcome back. We're in conversation with Dr. Harsha de Silva, Member of Parliament, former Minister, economist and Chairman of the Committee on Public Finance. I think it's important now to talk about Budget 2026 too. You described it, as I said before we went in to a short break, a betrayal of the people's mandate. Why so? The President himself in his speech explained the kind of reforms that the present government has embarked on and how the people of this country, his voters, are at the center of reforms.
I mean, to me, he's a parish priest, delivering a sermon in a Buddhist temple. Because, you see, what he's saying now and what he was saying then, are completely two different things. I mean, these are the people who said, look, we don't have to repay our debt. We are going to conduct an audit on our debt, and most debt is odious, so we don't have to pay. We will pay only what we need to pay. These are people who said, look, we will remove VAT on, a whole list of items. When we said we couldn't do it, right? When we said we couldn't not pay the debt, when we said we couldn't change the debt sustainability arrangement analysis, which everything else is based on, the revenue figures, the primary surplus figures, all of that, they said, well, we are going to change it. Right? So the promises that were made, they are not only not keeping them, they've almost forgotten that these promises were made. So that is why I'm saying it's a betrayal of the, the trust, because the action plan of the President and the government is a continuation of what former President Ranil Wickremesinghe started. It's nothing different. It's absolutely nothing different, right? And if there's anything that you think that I have missed, that other people who come on your show say, this is different, please tell me. And there's nothing different. So therefore, the system change, the story was Hatta Haya Vasarka Sape. If it was Hatta Haya Vasarka Sape, then certainly you have to change, I mean, I am not saying, like in Argentina, like Millie, you got to, bring a chainsaw and, cut things off or whatever, right? Not change like that. But when N.M. Perra, read out his first budget in 1970, he said, look, we said the previous guys were wrong, so we're changing it. We're going for a socialist structure. And when Ronnie DeMel came and presented his budget in, after the 77 Jaya Jayawardena's win, he said, look, what N.M. Perra did was completely, it doesn't work, so we're going to change it. Right? And it was changed. Right? So people expected, according to them, N.M. Perra was wrong, Ronnie DeMel was wrong, Sirima was wrong. Everybody, from DS to Ranil, they were all wrong. They all robbed and they destroyed this country. And they came to change it. So I am asking you and anyone else who can tell me, show me one change they have done.
So what really went wrong in the economy, and how would you say Sri Lanka must fix it urgently? What urgent reforms do you urge at this stage?
No, it is an ideological shift, Indeewari, that you require. I mean, if you are going to go on this path that reform is required, then you must not just talk about it, you must do it. Now, for instance, I am totally critical of what they did with the Ceylon Electricity Board Act, right? They were supposed to continue the ideology, the plan that was put in place. So, when I ask you, show me something they are doing differently, now they are saying, look, we are going to reform the electricity sector. Now, just take one example, because this is, I think, pretty clear. Is the GenCos, that means the generating companies, were broken up by technology. I mean, if it's hydro, like Mahavali, by the way, all of Mahavali was built during the Hattahaya Vasare Sape, Victoria, Durandanigal, Duranta, Betu, all those things. And now, that was one company. Then Norachole Coal was another company. Then the diesel GenCos were another company. The solar was another company. The wind was another company. Why was it structured that way? It was structured that way because forever and ever the Mahavali will be owned by the people. But Noracholi at some point, or West Coast at some point, or Sahasthanimi at some point, could be put to the market some amount. 10%, 20%, 30%, 70%, 100%, I don't know, right? But at some point. So that you could bring investments into the entire sector, because you could have X amount of this company and also invest in greenfield and otherwise. Now, the Transco, the transmission company, was supposed to be 51-49, 51 owned by the state. And the distribution companies were, going to be made into corporate entities, and some part of it could have been offloaded at some point in time, whatever X percentage. That is because the vision was and has to be that we invite private investment into both the GenCos, the Transcos, and the Discos, right? Now, what did the government do? They went and mucked it all up. They made the GenCos all one company. They put the Norachole, West Coast, Sahasranavi, Mahavali, solar, wind, all into one company, made it 100% state-owned. Now, how can you can't offload 10% of that company? Because if you do that, you're offloading 10% of Mahavali. It doesn't make sense. And the Transco also, the 49-51 was made to 100%, and the Discos also 100%. So what I'm saying, that is why I'm saying, what are you reading off of? Are you reading off the Bible or the Tripitaka Dhammapada? Which one? Because you're doing the same thing, not understanding what you're doing. So that is what I'm saying. It's here. It's ideologically. You need to get on the same page. This is what we need to do. Because when we ask Pubudu Niroshan, the guy who is in charge of all of this, not the cabinet minister, not anyone else. I think he's one of the Sahodarayas from Palavat, I don't know who he is. But he came to committee and we asked him specifically, how much investments do you require in the transmission to make sure that the grid is stable, the monkeys won't shut off electricity, so that you can into the system purchase renewables, more than what they are doing now. And the parliamentary Hansard would show you, he says $5 billion in the next 5 years. And we asked him, how much state, how much private? He said $4 billion should come from overseas, $1 billion locally. And I'll tell you, they are only budgeted for 2026 something like 30 billion rupees. Or 50 billion rupees, or some, not even that much, I think, small amount, right? And I'll go one step further. They are raising currently a mere $52 million, for their biggest capex project in the electricity sector. through AIIB, and I don't know whether you heard what the cost of that debt is. The cost of that debt in Indeewari is going to be slightly under 9% in US dollars. So how can you borrow at 9%? Here is only $50 million. They were talking about $1 billion a year at least, right? And then expect to reduce electricity prices. I heard Silva going and saying that they reduce electricity prices, they reduce fuel prices. I don't know what planet these people are living in, because then you must say to the people, look, we are unplugging ourselves from the IMF agreement where the tariff is based on cost. If the tariff is not based on cost, then you can do whatever you want. But if the tariff is based on cost, they agree on that, then you have to bring the cost down. You can't bring the cost down by destroying every hook that was put in there to bring in private investment. And then say we are going to borrow in the international markets at almost 9%, right, to put into infrastructure.
You've criticized heavily also government plans to borrow in 2026 in Parliament and at different fora. What does this mean for Sri Lanka's reserves position and stability going forward? And how do you suggest the government really address this issue?
No,
in the interest of time, 2027 and beyond, we continue to talk about this. How daunting is the situation?
No, I haven't actually, you got me wrong. I haven't criticized them on the need to borrow. I haven't. All what I am saying is there has to be a borrowing plan based on a medium-term debt strategy and stick to that, right? So they just today or yesterday announced that they're going for a dollar bond locally, right? I don't know what coupon they are offering and how much they were planning to raise $100 million, but I think they've cut it down to 50 million or 30 million or something like that, because of the question you asked rightly in terms of reserves and the pressure on the currency. But I don't think the government expected such a huge depreciation of the LKR in the last so many weeks. But they are hoping that they would get the IMF money. I just got your other Derana thing saying that the bank, IMF was going to take up our matter at the next board meeting. That will go through because the budget is pretty much within the IMF framework, and then we'll get some $350 million or whatever. But the real issue is that we were supposed to have increased our gross reserves. When RW left, we had something like 6 billion, and we still have something like 6 billion. Right? It hasn't grown at the gross. At the net, we are minus, right? And we still need about $600 to $800 million to meet the net international reserve target that we have agreed with the IMF, which means that the bank has to purchase USD in the market. So the bank is purchasing USD in the market. The car importers are purchasing USD in the market. All the other importers are purchasing USD in the market. And so therefore, there is pressure on the currency because the inflows are not coming. They're talking big about $837 million in FDI. Absolute bunkum if you really break it down, because it's something like $120 million that was real equity. Part of it is just retaining earnings that's going back, and intra-company loans. And for the first time after several years, these companies are able to borrow overseas because we are no longer default. And with that, they have been borrowing some money. So this is like, getting from Peter to pay Paul. So you have to be very careful when you actually tell people, look, we got so much coming in, etc. And during the budget speech, President AKD said, look, we got to manage the currency. There's some pressure on the currency. We got to manage the currency. And if you try to do that, Mr. President, you are going to go back to Mr. Cabral's antics.
So is Sri Lanka's exchange rate really flexible and there's no pressure?
No, I mean, if there was no pressure, how did it go from 300 to almost 310 in a matter of a few weeks? I mean, our markets are very shallow. It's only, $30–40 million a transaction a day. I don't know if it's a little bit more than that or not. But with Christmas shopping and all of that, imports, there is substantial pressure. But the issue is this. You see, if you're going to let the currency's value be determined in the market, you must let that happen. Now, the difference between Mr. Cabral's time and now is when they tried to manage both interest rates and inflation, exchange rates, right? Now, here you can't do that because the Central Bank's Act does not allow the politician or the Secretary of Treasury to direct the central bank to reduce interest rates, right? And so therefore, both can't happen, right? If interest rates remain what it is, then we'll have to see what happens to the currency. Now, who's going to give? I mean, the central bank has a legislative responsibility to ensure that inflation doesn't go above 5%. So, and political influence is no longer something that they can use. So, what I'm seeing is a fair amount of, I don't want to use the word volatility, but pressure showing up as depreciation of the currency.
As we move forward, we talk about beyond 2027, and earlier on, as at the onset of the program, you discussed about Sri Lanka 2048 and beyond. You mentioned that the growth we experience now is purely organic, but 9% is what's required. So if we are to spur that kind of growth, what industries are we to mobilize? What sectors? You've also spoken about the export sector, SMEs, SVAT especially. What is your fix here?
Yeah, so this is interesting because there is a conflict with what is in the Economic Transformation Act and what they call production economy, which is really industrial policy, which really means protectionism, right? So these two are in conflict. So you got to choose one or the other. You can't do both, right? So this is where, you either, pick one, right? You can't do both, right? And some people say, well, this happened in South Korea, it happened in Japan, etc., right? It happened in China. You must understand the political context. You must understand the historical background to when these things happen. And in a democracy, there is no way in which people's rights can be completely ignored, and the right to choose who is to govern us put in the waste paper basket. Those things have to be adhered to. Having said that, if you're going the export, taking that fork, going that road, then you have to break down the walls and build bridges, which I stand for, right? And that is to integrate with the rest of the world, right? And in the Economic Transformation Act, it is very clear that you're not going to slap the SME here. There are safeguards inbuilt, and we recently approved the Countervailing Duty Act and the Anti-Dumping Act. And these are nothing that these guys brought. These things are coming from the previous administration. So even though that we talked about opening up and it ensures a certain amount of what is called infant industry protection and all that, but that is not industrial policy in that sense. So this is about integrating. So in my view, I mean, it is going to be a hugely lost opportunity if we don't see the growth in India. India is the fastest growing large economy in the world, and if you take Tamil Nadu, Andhra, Telangana, Karnataka, and Kerala, just those 5 states in the south, you're looking at perhaps $3 to $4 trillion economy in the next few years. And look at the growth in the middle class, look at the requirement for services, for manufactured goods, and how do you then sort of leverage that, and the government doesn't have the backbone to say the 4 letters ECTA. Prime Minister Harini went, President AKD went, nothing in the joint statement, you see. So you have to really pick a path. That's one. The other one is the industrial policy path. Some people think that works. And if that is where they want to go, they've got a mandate, they got a mandate saying this, so they do it, right? So then that means more protectionism, ensure that it is domestically produced, you see. And state gets into the business of doing business. Now they opened up like various new sort of resuscitated corporations that were to be closed down and getting into the retail business of selling sugar and various other things. That's one. So my point is, pick one. Otherwise you are going to get stuck again.
Getting into a bit of politics before we wrap up the discussion now, is this really the thinking of the joint opposition?
Well, I mean, the joint opposition, we are all united in fighting the government's anti-democratic processes and laws and whatever they are trying to do. This is not a one-party state. What the JVP is trying to do, because in my mind there's nothing called NPP, right? There's nothing. Those guys are just, here and there, I don't know, they belong to various little groups. But the political ideology is still in Silva and the JVP, right? And they came back from China and said, we need, 30 years or 20 years to fix this country, etc., right? And look what they're doing. On the ground today, they're setting up something called the Praja Shakti groupings, right? In this country, in every village, every small town, there are so many sort of statutory and other associations, like Grama Samvardhana Samiti, that's statutory association. Then there is like the Maranadhara Samiti and the Kulangana Samiti in the temple or whatever, right? Now, these statutory associations are always, the leadership is based on a vote, right? Whether it is a Sampakare, it is a vote. Whether it is a Pradesha Sabha, it's a vote. It's a Grama Samvardhana Samiti, is a vote. For the first time ever, the JVP politician of the area names the president, chairman of the Praja Shakti Association in every Grama Seva division. So which means, and also not only that, that guy then sits on top of the Grama Sevaka, the development officer, and the 5 government animators in the community. And that guy has the right, I'm telling you, to decide who is allowed to be in the committee. That's a hell of a crazy situation.
So what are we looking at
Yeah,
going forward?
Yeah, so we will oppose anti-democratic processes, right? Because we will not let them take away the democracy that we have maintained. You know, who the JVP multiple times through armed struggle tried to dismantle and try to create their, you know, authoritarian state here. The opposition will not allow them that.
And the UNP and SJB will work together.
Okay, right. So the UNP and the SJB, we are coming from the same place now, Indeewari. We are coming from the same place. Right? The SJB was born because we had issues with the leadership of the UNP. Right? Now, the UNP, if it gets hijacked by some other party, or it offers itself to some other party, that would be a very sad thing. Right? Now, having said that, a party does not belong to an individual. A party belongs to the members of the party. So the UNP, I know, on the ground, right, by and large, pretty much the vast majority does not want to, you know, be second to some other party that those guys have been critical of for the last multiple decades.
Is your leader happy to work with the SLPP?
Now, I mean, we had a chat with the leader yesterday, all our organizers, and what he said is, you said SLPP. I don't think so. What he said is, look, you know, give me the responsibility, you know, I'll make sure that the UNP and the SJB need to work together. I mean, this is not an easy thing, right? But ideologically, at the bottom, at the grassroots, we are the same. So we need to bring some legal, some organizational structures, so that all those people, you know, many people didn't go to vote, right? They stayed at home because they didn't want to vote UNP and they didn't want to vote for us.
Finally, if reforms persist and not stall, how would this change Sri Lanka's economic and political landscape, really?
You mean the AKD's, President AKD's game?
The reforms Sri Lanka has embarked on.
Yeah. I mean, look, you know, you guys got to give the guys credit for some of the things they're doing. You know, the fight against corruption is commendable, but at the same time, they must also, you know, make sure that it is not a witch hunt. You know, go after the opposition. That's not what we expect, right? And multiple incidents of corruption have been identified, whether it is the container matter or multiple things, right? But nothing seems to be happening, right? So while we agree that corruption needs to be fought, it must also be equitable and cannot only target the opposition. The fight against drugs, I mean, everybody is for it, right? We got to make sure that these terrible people who distribute drugs to, you know, kids in this country are put away. But that's just, you know, you got to also understand why people are using drugs, you know, not only, you know, this is demand and supply. So you got to address those real issues as well. But, you know, we must ensure that we don't go back to the racist politics, you know, communal politics, you know, we saw in the last few days, you know. That's not what we are as a nation. We must at least now understand that that is in the past. Going forward, it is not just rhetoric, but, you know, all our people must be working together. I don't see that really happening, right? They seem to be getting somehow pulled to communal politics. But I have a huge issue with foreign policy, right? There is absolutely no foreign policy. You know, where we are going, we don't know, right? You know, President AKD visited a bunch of countries. That's not foreign policy.
Are you saying we might make more foes than friends?
No, I'm not saying we are making foes, but I mean, we are not making, now today's friendships should be based on economics, right? And there's nothing really going on there, right? Other than what they inherited, to make sure that they keep, for instance, the GSP Plus and other things, but.
Right, I'm told that's all the time we have, but thank you very much, Dr. Harsha de Silva, for your time here at Hyde Park. An absolutely insightful discussion. We were in conversation with the former Minister of Economic Reforms and Public Distribution, State Minister of National Policies and Economic Affairs back in 2018, again former Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, former Deputy Minister of Policy Planning and Economic Development, and of course Member of Parliament since 2010, now Chairman of the Committee on Public Finance, economist and politician, Member of Parliament of the Samagi Janabalawegaya, Dr. Harsha de Silva. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Indeewari.
Well, we'll see you again next week with yet another discussion here at Hyde Park. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.